Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Business by Belief. It has been a while. We went through a little bit of some struggles lately the last few weeks, so please forgive me that it's been a little bit since we put an episode out. We had some deaths in the family, and that kind of takes it or takes your focus away from things for a little while. We had two grandparents pass away and spent a lot of time with the family and kids, just grieving through that process and trying to help them through it. So just forgive me that it's been a little bit, but I kind of wanted to do an episode on that very thing, given that it was so fresh in my mind. And one of the things that I struggle with has always been showing grief or allowing grief to kind of take over for a while and really let the mourning process take hold and begin to heal from events like that. And I've always struggled with that. I always kind of found a way to brush it off, to distract myself so I didn't really have to go through it. And this one was of course personal, and it affected it affected the kids a lot, especially some of the older ones, because there were two sets of grandparents that passed away within a span of about a week of each other. And the funerals actually were held a day apart, one on a Sunday, one on a Monday. And, for children who haven't gone through something like that, they're all young still, and they haven't really lost close relatives like parents or grandparents. So this is really their first experience with it. To lose two that back to back and that close together, that's a hard thing to process, especially for a child. It's hard enough for an adult to take that and kind of unwrap what's happened and learn to sort of process and grieve over it and move on. But it's definitely hard for a child, and so I really took my focus and put it on my wife, put it on my children, and just tried to guide them and support them through what was going on. But death is just one of those things that's going to happen, right? And throughout life, you run into people who have natural deaths or untimely deaths, unforeseen circumstances, whether it be all of a sudden a physical injury or some sort of illness that just takes over. And it's hard to sometimes it happens so quick that you really can't grab a hold of it. You can't take in what's going on and try to make sense of it before you know it, the person may have passed away. And that's a hard thing to take on. But tragedies happen, right? This is life. And as believers, we're not exempt from that. We are of the human flesh. We are of the human world. Nowhere does it say our life will be easier because we're believers and we follow God, and we have to remember that. But, like I said, I take my position as head of my household seriously. And when something like that happens to my family, it's my job to console them, to console my wife, to console my children, and help out and jump in and do what I can to try to just explain things and listen and be there for a hug and to hold on to and to talk to and try to answer questions. Be as supportive as you can. That's our job as men. That's our job as husbands, and that's our job as fathers. And as a result of that, sometimes we tend to put our feelings and our time to grieve and mourn something on the back burner. And to be fair, it's been several weeks since the deaths occurred. It's been a couple of weeks since the funerals took place. And honestly, I still haven't really mourned it and grieved it properly. And we're going to talk about that. I think that's something we all tend to do fairly regularly. But I want to hit on a scripture real quick that sort of ties into this. It kind of speaks to it a little bit. And it's all the way up, the start in Genesis. Genesis 50 verses 1 through 3. And this is a time when, it goes through the death of Jacob. And in Genesis 50 verse 1, Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. So if you break that scripture down a little bit, Jacob knew that he was about to pass away. If you read before we started, Jacob knew he was about to pass away. He asked to be buried in the same field with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah, and that's where he wanted to be buried. And when he finished giving his burial instructions, he wanted to be buried in the cave in that field. And when he finished giving those instructions to all of his sons, he passed away. And Jacob threw himself on top of him and wept and mourned his loss and started to mourn his loss. But what I find interesting is that the Egyptians spent a period of 70 days mourning for him. And it doesn't go into detail what that mourning process was like, or exactly, other than just tradition, why it was 70 days. But, so the question I asked, and I asked my pastor this, I said, what did they do for those 70 days? Was it strictly a time of mourning? Was it all day and all night mourning and grieving the loss of this man, or did they continue on with their daily tasks, just kind of keeping the mourning to them? Or maybe did they have a mourning time set aside at the end of the workday where the Egyptians would come and pay their respects to Jacob and honor him and mourn him along with the family? And it doesn't really say, but they spent 70 days in mourning. And, as men, when something happens, we tend to think of our families first, and we tend to find a way to distract ourselves, right? So, typically we'll focus on work, right? We'll assist our family, and then we might take a day or two off, maybe, and then we just get up and go back to work, right? And we do it for a couple of reasons, because we provide. That's our duty as men, as fathers and husbands, is to provide. And I think a lot of it is it puts our focus on something else so we don't have to grieve. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I think we use work as an excuse not to have to face what's upsetting us. But we have to, and we tend to think we have to show a strength, right? We have to be the strong one who doesn't show that emotion, who isn't in the moment weak, so we can stand strong for our family. And I really don't have a problem with that necessarily. The problem I have is that, and I'm guilty of it, is that we don't find any other time to grieve. And we need to do that. It's not healthy to hold those emotions in. It's not healthy to hold those feelings in. We've got to find a way, an outlet to get that out. And I know a lot of men will go to their wives, some immediately, some after a point in time, and finally just have that moment where they can kind of let it all go. And some people will find a friend at church, or a deacon or a pastor, or just a close best friend, because grief is no different than any other kind of a burden you may be carrying. So you may carry a burden of financial distress, or you may be carrying a burden of unhappiness in the workplace, or a burden of something that you've done wrong. But grief over the death or loss of somebody is also a burden you carry, and we carry it heavy on our hearts. So we've got to find a way and a place to let that out. And of course, the best thing you can do is to talk to God about it. The best thing you can do is to lay that burden just with any other burden that you lay at his feet. You laid that burden at his feet, that emotion, that sadness, maybe anger, maybe confusion about the death or loss of somebody at his feet, and let him take that from you and relieve you some. Let him relieve you of that burden that just it keeps you up at night. It's no different than anything else. It adds stress to you. But we have to be able to let that out, because we have to be able to know how to mourn. We have to know how to grieve. And when we do that, we need to as men, I believe we need to make sure we're showing that in front of our sons in particular. We need to make sure that our sons know that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to cry if you need to. And I'm not saying this as though I'm the best at it, because I'm not. But I do try to set an example for my son that, listen, the death, and him and I have talked about it. Death is a sad event, right? It's an event where somebody you love is no longer here anymore, and you're not going to get to see or talk to them again, at least while we're on this planet, at least while we're still alive here. And it's okay to be sad about that. It's okay to cry about that, because it is sad. It is disappointing, and you get a lonely feeling sometimes, depending on how close your relationship was with that person, that you'll never get to see them again. But I told him, I said, you've got to, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry. And if you need to come to me, I'm here. You come to me. And him and I did have a couple moments together where he was, we hugged each other, and which I hug my son a lot. That's not unusual. But where he felt comfortable with his dad in doing that. My daughters, they grieve. Like, women typically naturally do it because boys want to look tough. They learn that from their fathers usually, or from a male role model, that men are just tough and they don't show their emotion. They don't cry. They don't get upset to that extent. And some of us don't, and I'm bad about that too. And that's one of the things I'm trying to work on with myself, especially through this process. So we've got to find a way to let it go, and we've got to find a way to say our goodbyes. And if we need to cry to get that out, or talk to somebody, or speak to somebody, or just lay down, hit your knees, and give it to God, whatever it may be, you've got to get that burden off your chest. You've got to get that stress out of your body, because it's no different than holding in any other kind of emotion. It's not good for you. It's unhealthy. It's unhealthy physically. It's unhealthy spiritually, because the more you dwell on it and don't accept it, and don't process it the way that we need to process it, it can bring it out of anger or questions or a distrust. Maybe in what happened, you're kind of angry at God for what happened, and that's not an unusual response. But until you grieve it and admit it and lay it all on the table, and let your body handle it, and then ultimately give it to God and let Him take it, that can put you in a bad place spiritually. And that's a dangerous place to be. That's a dangerous road to go down. And you don't want to do that. So, at the end of the day, you've got to learn to grieve. We've got to take the time to grieve. We've got to let God guide us through that process. And if we go back to what we use as a distraction, like we use work typically as a distraction for things, because that's what we do. We put our heart and soul into our work. We're providers. We take pride in what we do. It's very important to us to be able to provide. That is a place that men typically use to get their mind off of subjects that are sad or depressing or bother them, or just, to just get our mind on something else, just focus on something else. But we've got to take the time to grieve it as well. And if that means that you need to take time off of work, hopefully you work for somebody who understands that. Like, we don't have maternity leave or paternity. Well, I guess some places do have paternity leave now. That wasn't really a thing when I had my kids, but if if they can give you a day just to get away, right? Don't take advantage of it, but just a day to get away. I mean, I took a day off just to kind of to be at home with the kids and the family, but I did go back to work, because like one day was enough for me. I can't just sit around and do that all day. But let's just be careful how much we let use work as a distraction to keep us from processing emotions we need to process, and process heartbreak, and hurt that we need to process. And, if we can just kind of keep a balance with that throughout those times, I think it'll help us heal faster. I think it'll help us not make decisions or keep stuff down that can actually make us physically and spiritually sick. It's easy to get discouraged when we go through stuff like that. So, keeping yourself distracted at work is not a way to keep you from being discouraged. It's just a way to put off the inevitable. It's a way to increase the amount of discouragement because the amount of stress and heartache and hurt just continues to build because you won't let it go. So, as men, we've got to lean on each other. We've got to support each other. I had several men from church reach out to me when all this was going on and express their condolences and they were sorry, and if they could help, they'd be glad to. And I appreciate and love those men very much. But, most of you know that we're probably not going to accept anything. We're just going to keep on going about our business because that's what we do. That's what we're programmed to do. Doctrinally, we're to provide for our families and be heads of the household. So that's what we do. We get up and go about our business. We just got to make sure to take care of ourselves at the same time, because I'm not going to ask my wife to take care of me in a time of her loss. And I'm not going to ask my kids to take care of me ever in a time of any loss. That's not their position, or their job is to take care of their father. And I'm not going to ask my wife to do it because one of those people who passed away was her grandfather. And she's in a time of mourning, and she's still processing it to this day. So that will not be something that I ask her to do. So we've got to learn to lean on each other. We've got to learn how to humble ourselves and just let it go if we need to let it go. And then lean on other men, of course, from church or best friends or parents, family, whatever it may be, just if you need to talk through it. But sometimes that's all it takes. So anyways, just, that's been on my heart ever since that happened. I just haven't had a lot of time to sit down and go through it with everything that was going on. And, it's fall, so we're already busy. So that's my fault, but I hope to kind of get back on a regular cycle here of doing them. I've got several topics lined up, but I would love to hear some suggestions if anybody has any. But I thank you for listening, and until next time, I pray everybody has a fantastic rest of the week. Whatever you've got on your heart, give it to God. Whatever it is, especially if it involves the loss of somebody important to you, because if that person was saved, and I pray they are without a doubt in a better place now. And that's a consolation that should warm your heart drastically. Take grace or take some comfort in knowing that if you've also been saved and you're a believer, that when it's your turn to go, you will be there, and hopefully your family can have some peace about their loss of you as well. So, but just try to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, men, because, if we don't, we won't be able to take care of our families. So God bless you. Take care, and I will talk to you next time.